Hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm Sam Sachs. It's the Friday show. Time to take your news medicine before the weekend. And we begin in Gaza, where a ceasefire is holding, tentatively, following the Israeli cabinet's approval of the deal on Thursday. There are reports, though, of Israeli attacks still underway in Khan Yunis and a particularly deadly strike in Gaza City that killed or injured 70 people, according to Hamas. The group said the attack was an effort by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to derail the ceasefire agreement. But there is movement on the ground today of Israeli forces pulling back according to the terms of that agreement. Israel will not be fully vacating Gaza, though, and will still have troops positioned in about half of the enclave. Hostage exchanges are expected early next week, though the full list of Palestinian prisoners to be released from Israel has not been settled on. The ceasefire agreement also requires Israel to let in 600 trucks of humanitarian aid into Gaza every day. During a cabinet meeting on Wednesday, President Trump heaped praise on himself and his team for securing the deal.
Last night, we reached a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East, something that people said was never going to be done. We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. This tremendous spirit like I haven't seen. And even the news, I won't call it fake news for this purpose, because they really were very fair today, I must tell you, in all cases. But they covered it very well. They covered it very fairly. Everybody loves it. Everybody. People that were never giving us a fair shake, frankly, they can't even believe it. They're amazed by it. A lot of people are.
Look, it is true that President Trump did far more than Biden ever did to force this ceasefire. But it's also true that Trump allowed Israel to break the prior ceasefire in January. And just like Biden, Trump has supplied Israel with weapons and aid to fuel the genocide in Gaza. So it's premature to give plaudits, especially now that Trump has learned he did not receive the Nobel Peace Prize this year, and thus his interest in being the guarantor of the peace in Gaza will likely wane. The relief felt around the world right now that the genocide has at least temporarily ended must not inhibit efforts to hold those who committed the genocide accountable. The ceasefire gave Gaza authorities a chance to take the toll of the devastation of the last 2 years. The enclave's media office released a statement quantifying the damage Israel inflicted on a daily basis every day since October 7th, 2023. Each day over the last 2 years, on average, the Israeli military killed 18 male and female students and 1 teacher, destroyed 367 housing units, demolished more than 1 mosque, made 394 families homeless, destroyed a central water well, destroyed nearly 4.5 miles of electricity networks, destroyed 6,292 feet of water and sewage networks, destroyed 13,123 feet of roads. It also targeted 1 shelter and displacement center every 3 days over the last 2 years. It's almost unimaginable. This cannot be allowed to happen again, and the only way to ensure that it doesn't is if the people who did this are held responsible, from Tel Aviv to Washington, D.C. All right, now to Chicago, where a federal judge has blocked President Trump from deploying National Guard troops into another American city. Hundreds of federalized soldiers are already stationed outside Chicago on the orders of the president over the objection of the Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, both men Trump has called to be imprisoned. Pritzker and Johnson sued the administration, and on Thursday, Judge April M. Perry issued a temporary restraining order blocking the troop deployment to Chicago for 2 weeks. Perry told government lawyers during arguments that she has seen, quote, no credible evidence that there is a danger of a rebellion in the state of Illinois. Last weekend, a separate court in Oregon issued a restraining order preventing the administration from sending federalized troops to Portland, rejecting the government's characterization that a rebellion was underway there, too. These are the scenes, by the way, in Portland. This is the so-called rebellion. The White House is freaking out over dancing furries. Judge Perry's ruling prompted more angry tweets from Trump's closest fascist advisor, Stephen Miller. But opposition to Trump's troop deployments came from an unlikely place also on Thursday, Oklahoma's Republican Governor Kevin Stitt. In an interview with the New York Times, Stitt said the deployments violate states' rights and that, quote, Oklahomans would lose their mind if Pritzker in Illinois sent troops down to Oklahoma during the Biden administration. Stitt is the chairman of the National Governors Association. Governor Pritzker and California Governor Gavin Newsom threatened to withdraw from the century-old organization unless it came out against the president's actions. And finally, government shutdown, day 9. And a new report out this week shows why Democrats absolutely cannot cave on this. The party is seeking to replenish Medicaid funding with hundreds of billions of dollars that were ripped away from the program by the recently passed Republican budget bill. And Democrats have made that one of their demands in order to vote for a funding bill to reopen the government. On average, about 1/5 of all healthcare spending in each state is through Medicaid. And the group Protect Our Care has been monitoring the number of at-risk medical centers around the country that could be forced to close if their revenue stream from Medicaid is reduced, as the Republican budget bill does, by over $400 billion over the next 10 years. Protect Our Care examined hospitals, nursing homes, and clinics that meet one or both of the two criteria. One, they are in the top 10% Medicaid payer mix among all rural hospitals in the U.S., as in hospitals that have the largest share of their revenue dependent on Medicaid. The second criteria, they've experienced 3 consecutive years of negative total margin. The group's latest report identified 500 healthcare providers now at risk of closing or at least scaling back their services in the wake of the Republican budget bill. 500, each one a facility that thousands of people or more rely on for critical care or rely on for their job. I mean, hospitals are among the biggest employers in towns and cities. That's the devastation coming down the pike. Here's what it looks like on a map. Every state gets hit by this wave. Here's how Protect Our Care summarized it. Quote, when the GOP healthcare crisis shuts down a rural emergency room or urgent care clinic, it means a father experiencing a stroke will wait 11 to 16 minutes longer for an ambulance, a delay that could determine whether or not he gets to watch his children grow up. When the GOP healthcare crisis closes a community's only maternity ward, it forces an expectant single mother to make a harrowing hours-long journey to access care after she goes into labor, putting her life and the life of her unborn child at risk. The sad part is, even if Republicans cave on this, and it's unlikely they will, far more likely the Democrats cave as they always do, but if somehow it works out and Republicans do agree to restore Medicaid funding, important to remember we still have one of the worst healthcare systems in the world among so-called rich countries. A for-profit nightmare that still has far, far too much buy-in among both political parties. The only way to avoid this healthcare crisis in the long run is to crush the insurance cartels and build a single-payer system that guarantees all healthcare as a human right, not just a citizen's right. Next up, there are some troubling developments in the U.S. housing market. Last year, home sales in the U.S. declined to their lowest level in nearly 30 years as prospective homebuyers are priced out of the market. A combination of housing shortages and elevated interest rates means that today, a typical household needs to earn upwards of $120,000 a year just to be able to afford a mortgage for a median-priced home of $400,000. $120,000 a year when the median household income in the U.S. is only about $77,000 a year. This affordability crisis is now leading to two things, both bad. First, the number of real estate investors purchasing homes, as opposed to individuals needing a place to live, is increasing. In the first quarter of this year, about 27% of all homes sold were purchased by investors. That's an increase over the average between 2020 and 2023, when only 18% of home sales were made to investors. And then in the second quarter of this year, that number surged up to 1/3 of new home purchases going to investors. That's the highest level in 5 years. Often these investors already own land and buildings, but plan to use the house for a vacation or property rental. And in a market like this, they have an advantage over traditional home buyers because they can pay in cash up front or use equity from their other properties, so they're not burdened by the high interest rates. So you may have missed out on that one house you were eyeing that's affordable, but don't worry, you can still live there. You just have to pay rent to a landlord. The other byproduct of all this is desperate home buyers are turning to more risky mortgages. The Mortgage Bankers Association reported this week that the share of adjustable rate mortgages, or ARMs, increased to 9.5%. That's a jump up from 8.4% the week before. Adjustable rate mortgages lock home buyers into a favorable rate for a period of time, up to 10 years, but then revert back to the market rate after that initial period. And these are risky because circumstances in the market could change and turn an affordable mortgage into one that's not anymore. That's why they're often called exploding mortgages. This is precisely what happened during the great financial crisis of 2008. It was caused in part by a subprime mortgage bubble where predatory lenders lured people into these exploding mortgages. And once the initial period ended and the adjustable rate kicked in, foreclosures surged. Now, we aren't at that stage yet, but an increase in ARMs is still not ideal. I mentioned on prior show this week that the AI bubble was now 4 times larger than the 2008 subprime mortgage bubble. That was not intended to be taken as a challenge to inflate a new subprime bubble. It's Friday, and we're living up to our Devo-inspired ethos around here, that when a problem comes around, you must whip it. And we've got a problem. This week's Rich Dick is David Ellison. Yeah, we've been circling around him for a while. Now it's officially his turn. Ellison is at the top of Skydance Media, which recently purchased Paramount and its primary news holding, CBS. Ellison then gave $150 million to the loathsome Zionist Bari Weiss for her billionaire ass-kissing blog, The Free Press, and installed Weiss in a position to oversee CBS's news content, sparking anger among staff. Ellison was interviewed by Bloomberg on Thursday, and he attempted to justify his hiring of Weiss and the purchase of the Free Press by claiming that their value systems aligned with CBS.
You put someone in Barry's background is primarily as an opinion columnist, right? She's not a kind of dyed-in-the-wool news reporter. And there are going to be people at CBS News, and there have been a lot of people journalists outside of CBS News already who seem very concerned because opinion and news are typically kept separate. And now you have kind of the editorial leader of this news group whose background is in opinion.
Yeah, look, I'll continue to say the same thing. Like, I'm not going to make a political statement. I'm really not going to do it.
No, I'm not asking a political statement, but you can understand maybe why some of the staff is nervous, or I'm sure you and your team are already ready for there to be a bunch of leaks over the next few weeks of people who don't like whatever direction it's going in.
Yeah, Lucas, what I think I said is, like, again, I'll keep going back to it. I think if you look at the value system that basically the free press has been operated under, really does align with the value system that we believe in, which I also believe is in line with the legacy of CBS News. We basically believe in all of the things that the free press believed in, which is we want to speak to the 70% of the audience that identifies themselves as center left, as center right. We believe in the open exchange of ideas, and then fundamentally presenting both sides.
The values of open exchange of ideas and presenting both sides, huh? Interesting. Not sure why you would pick Bari Weiss then, who spent her entire life punching left and, as an ardent Zionist, pushing Palestinians out of the discourse, trying to get individuals fired or killed for criticism of Israel. Weiss is doing exactly what's expected of her already. Her first big move at CBS News was to flex her Rolodex and book prior Secretaries of State Clinton, Pompeo, and Blinken for a roundtable discussion to react to the Gaza ceasefire. 3 people themselves that have the blood of Gaza on their hands. According to Semaphore, when CBS News staffers suggested bringing on actual Palestinians to discuss the issue, Weiss ignored it. She's already making her mark. When David Ellison talks about shared values, what he's actually referring to is being a Zionist. Paramount was the only major production company to come out against a growing Hollywood boycott of Israeli movie-making institutions and festivals linked to the apartheid government's genocide in Gaza. There are over 5,000 signatures now to that boycott. Paramount released a statement calling the boycott discriminatory, which sparked a backlash from staff. Ellison elaborated on his position during Thursday's interview.
We made a statement that was effectively discriminating based on where somebody is from is wrong. And I stand by that statement.
Yeah, that's not what the boycott does, dipshit. It's not a pledge to stop working with Israelis. It's a pledge to stop working with entities involved in crimes against humanity. And it's a campaign modeled off what actors and studios did to stop apartheid in South Africa in the 1980s, when directors Jonathan Demme and Martin Scorsese formed the group Filmmakers United Against Apartheid, which refused to distribute films in South Africa. I guess we know where you would have stood on that issue, David. While criticizing artists who want to use what little power they have to end a genocide, Ellison is helping to spread propaganda aimed at justifying that genocide. Paramount this month hosted the Israeli-made film Red Alert, a 4-part scripted drama about the October 7th uprising, told from the perspective of Israeli victims. A review in The Hollywood Reporter called the film manipulative and fundamentally propaganda calculated to yield very visceral and sentimental responses. David Ellison hails from a family of billionaires, the son of one of the richest men in the world, Larry Ellison, who owns Oracle and is involved in the U.S. takeover of TikTok, another major media platform the ruling class is trying to scrub of any pro-Palestinian content. And David Ellison is also rumored to be trying to purchase Warner Brothers Discovery and another major news holding, CNN. The family is allied with President Donald Trump. In fact, as part of Skydance's purchase of Paramount, Trump was personally paid $16 million by the company to settle one of his frivolous lawsuits that he never would have won in court. The payment preceded the FCC's approval of the merger. And here are some comments Trump made this week about the Ellison's ownership of CBS.
I think ABC is very bad. I think NBC is very bad. And CBS has a new owner. So we have hope for CBS. CBS has a great new owner, my opinion.
CBS has a great new owner. Well, the increasing media holdings and the Ellison family's close ties to the president prompted this question during Thursday's interview.
What do you say to people who are concerned that there's just like an Ellison/Ellison Trump plot to just like corner the media business? You've got Elon with Twitter. There are.
No, I know where you're going. Look, it's under the headline of doing better. I can only speak to. Look.
Look. I've got nothing to say. David Ellison, we see what you're trying to do, and it sucks. You're this week's Rich Dick. All right, friends, the show ends today with a sunrise all the way from dang New Zealand. Yeah, it was sent in by Jeremy in Littleton. Enjoy. Thank you, Jeremy. That's the show. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Find more MMN at means.tv. We also have YouTube and podcast channels, and you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. One day, capitalism will fall. Promise, it will. But until then, we'll be right here. See you next week.